Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I welcome debate, open, honest debate like anybody else. And I think it is good. We should encourage that. But I think the main problem we tend to have in Zimbabwe is we tend to discuss over the same issue over and over again because we never pay attention to detail. Detail is everything. Here is somebody arguing that we can still make Zimbabwe a success. Zimbabwe can be prosperous in the present economic situation. This is unbelievable. Zimbabwe has been independent for the last 44 years. The basic infrastructure, when we gained our independence, were infinitely better than they were now. Zimbabwe had many industries. We had functioning hospitals, schools. Yes, the wealth was not evenly distributed, but the infrastructure and the potential was there. 44 years down the line, the country's economy is in a mess. That is a fact. And we can keep on pretending that things are okay. They are not okay. Here is somebody passionately arguing the point of people should go back to Zimbabwe and the country will be prosperous. Let's just listen to what she has to say.
Zimbabwe, there will never be a plethora of opportunities that are in Zimbabwe right now for our generation. Kanchiti generation yautara vanhu vari 30 years and above that are interested in entrepreneurship. Vashandi ve 9 to 5, this is not for you. Ende wamufanwa ngemuchienda. Panapa, ndepe vanhu vane muono wakafananawo newangu. Sazoswera muchiita zvinhu zvekunituka mumacomments because I block and delete. Tofambira mberi nevane muono unenge unoyu. Handiti, there will never be another time, guys, like mukana iri muZimbabwe right now. Ndoda kupai context. Rimwe gore, bababona vakati vanhu vari kuda minda huyai. Vana baba vedu panguva iyoyo kunana 1997 hamene 2000 ikoko tachiri kuchikoro chiri vadiki. Vamwe vana baba vedu vari clever stereki vakabva vati kufunga kwenyu funga kuti Mulungu angatorerwe purazi, kufunga kwenyu funga kuti Mulungu angadzingwe munyika. Vana baba vanga vaine muono vakanotora minda, guys, vakaita zvavakaita. Vana baba vanga vari clever, maclever blacks ayai vakaramba minda yai zvikapfuura zvakadaro. 20 something years later, isusu taakuda land iyoyo. Land hakusisina. Land haigadzirwe ka2 kana yaienda handiti. Mukana wavo wakauya wakapfuura, but mukana iwoyo wakaafekta vamwe vanhu vanenge isusu tiri kuda chi land iyoyo handiti. Napanapa futi example yemikana inouya ichienda because mukana inguva unopfuura. Rimwe gore Smith achiri mupenyu akati vanhu vane michato uyai mutore dzimba nana location anambuya vedu.
She is going to give another example of what happened during Ian Smith's time. I will not dwell on that. I think let's just focus on the issue, on the point she brought up. This issue of Robert Mugabe gave land to people, and some people who were clever took up that land. The truth of the matter is, the farms were seized beginning 2000 to about 2008. And most of the beneficiary of that land redistribution were Zanu PF loyalists. And even they few of them got actually title deeds. This is why you find anyone or most of the Zanu PF loyalists were fallen out of the party. Even some of the big wigs, like Xavier Kasukuwere, Patrick Joao, when they fell out with the regime, they lost their farms. Because they don't have title deeds. The problem with Zimbabwe is that we have got a corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical regime. The economy is not performing. The plethora of opportunities that she's talking about is for the few who are right, we have got the right connections. Why is it that Zimbabwe, yes, there are many people who have left the country, but it still has 15 million people, and most of those are unemployed? Why? You cannot keep on pretending that the country is doing well and the opportunities are there, and yet there's so much unemployment. Even those who had thriving businesses, it is very difficult to thrive when the other economic things like the money during the period 2000 to 2008, for instance, she's talking about. That's when we had hyperinflation. People who had put money aside, they find their savings wiped out because of the hyperinflation. Yes, the connected ones, they made a killing. They could go walk into the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, get Forex loans in foreign currency, and they were told they could repay them in local currency at the official exchange rate. And many of them didn't even bother to pay it back that much. How many ordinary Zimbabweans walked into the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe to get such a loan? And when those failed to repay it, guess what? The ordinary Zimbabwean was asked to pay it. Government took over the loan, the unpaid loans. Corruption and mismanagement is at the heart of Zimbabwe's economic meltdown. And to keep on pretending that somehow, if we work harder, we will make it succeed, the economy will still be prosperous, is naive, to say the least. We need to sort out our failed political system. The rampant corruption, the gross mismanagement, the criminal waste of the country's human and material resources is weighing heavily on the Zimbabwe economy. There's no way that economy will ever prosper. It is not the lack of will that economy is in a serious problem. It is the same Zimbabweans who worked hard and made the economy prosperous before independence. And then they found themselves with a new government, and the economy started on decline, and has been on that path ever since. we need to deal with the root cause of the country's economic meltdown. Pretending that somehow, if we work hard, the economy will still thrive, is not solving the problem. It's only compounding it. Because the regime then thinks things will succeed. Let's carry on. Meanwhile, we are sinking deeper and deeper into the problem. No one is saying that Zimbabwe doesn't have the potential. It has incredible potential. If Zimbabwe was to sort out its problem, its case of rigged elections and bad governance, Zimbabwe can become the South Korea of Africa, as one Japanese scholar, Ken Yamamoto, once predicted after visiting the country. He was right. It has the potential to do so. But as long as the country is weighed down by the criminal waste of human and material resources, by a regime that is corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical, that has stayed in power these last 44 years for no other reason other than that it's able to rig the elections. That is the elephant in the room. We must address that elephant. It's absolutely shocking that even 44 years, after 44 years of rigged elections and being stuck with this corrupt and incompetent regime, somebody still wants to pretend that we can solve all our problems without addressing the issue of good governance. Unbelievable. Simply unbelievable. She was very good at saying, well, I can't tell you what opportunities there are. It doesn't matter. The opportunities are there. The problem is you will find yourself facing unparalleled challenges. Any business you take up now, in the present political situation in Zimbabwe, is bound to be affected by the dysfunctional political system. You've got to use the roads. The roads have got potholes. Are you going to repair those roads yourself? You need electrical power. Ever since the country's independence in 1980, it was only last year that the regime finally commissioned Hwange Unit number 7 and 8 to add to the generating capacity of the country. And yet, those projects, Unit number 7 and 8 at Hwange, Batoka Gorge, which to the ordinary person out there is the equivalent of Kariba Dam built between Victoria Falls and Kariba Dam, which would have meant we've got 2 Kariba dams generating power for the country's needs. Those projects, the feasibility studies of those projects were handed to the Mugabe regime at independence. Ian Smith would have undertaken those projects in the 70s if it was not for the worsening civil war. And yet, Batoka Gorge, we're still talking about it. It hasn't even started. Hwange Unit 7 and 8 we've added finally last year, 40 years overdue. And it wasn't because the country didn't have the money. Look at what Mugabe was building. His blue roof mansion, 4-story building, worth 3 to 4 billion US dollars. That would have paid for the construction, design, construct, commission of Patoka Gorge. That is what we are talking about here, the criminal waste of resources. He wasn't the only one, of course. All the other Zanu PF leaders have been building mansions all over the place. They've got Porsche cars parked in their yards. They took the farm, yes, but how many of them were able to keep production on those farms? If anything, actually, it has become another looting opportunity. Mnangagwa has been having these command agriculture projects, spending billions of dollars. And guess who are the primary beneficiaries of that? The same Zanu PF individual who got the farms. And yet, throughout all those periods, with all those billions of dollars poured in command agriculture, more often than not, the country was forced to have to import food because the nation was starving. And this is a nation that was the bread basket of the region. It is unbelievable that some Zimbabweans bury their heads in the sand and refuse to see the problem before us, the problem of rigged elections and bad governance. And they think if we work hard enough, Zimbabwe can still be prosperous, regardless of the dictatorship, regardless of the criminal waste of resources by the dictatorship, regardless of the political paralysis. Zanu PF has created a political system in which the opposition, such as it is corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless. Chamisa had a point when he resigned in January this year that CCC was infiltrated. He had a point. There cannot be any denying that Zanu PF would have infiltrated. See, for what purpose? For making CCC totally dysfunctional. So we have got a ruling party, Zanu PF, that is corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless. And it has infiltrated the opposition to make sure that it stays in power. And this was more graphically illustrated during the GNU of 2008 to 2013, when the opposition failed to implement even one token reform in 5 years. If anybody thinks that Zimbabwe can still be the South Korea of Africa, economically prosperous, and we still have the same corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical Zanu PF in power, complete with its sidekick, the MDC CCC, equally corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless, then you live in a different world. And after 44 years of rigged elections, with the country in total meltdown, millions of our people living in abject poverty, and somebody still believes that all we need is people to work even harder. It's unbelievable. The mentality of such people is unbelievable. They're back to the animal farm mentality of the horse, boxer, the horse, who, when things were not going on well, instead of saying, well, let's look at what has gone wrong here. His solution, his motto was, I'll work harder. The economy of Zimbabwe has collapsed, not because people were not working hard, but because of the criminal waste of the country's human and material resources by the Zanu PF dictatorship. Let's solve the problem. Instead of burying our heads in the sand because we do not want to confront Zanu PF. We dare not confront Zanu PF. It must be us who are not working hard enough. I think after 44 years, with the country in the mess it is in, it really is disappointing that any Zimbabweans will still be so narrow-minded to the point of refusing to see the reality on the ground. There are people in Zimbabwe right now who are spending hours queuing for this new currency, the ZiG. The regime is coming up with such ridiculous rules where you have earned that money, it is in your account, and yet you find when you go to the bank, they are not allowed to take that money. You've got to work for it. You queue for 4 hours only to be given 100 ZiG. And so you've got to come back again tomorrow and queue for another 4 hours. If that is gross, that is not gross waste of human resources, I don't know what is. People are having to work hard for the same money that they've already earned. And it's all because the regime is afraid that the ZiG will lose value. And so it's trying to contain inflation by making the currency very difficult to get. At the end of the day, the point is the economy is not performing and the people are suffering for it. And here is somebody coming up and saying the opportunity is now, it's never been any better. Well, those people who are spending hours queuing for the few ZiG do not see those opportunities. They would rather be working in their own fields, doing something. And many of those people who are in Zimbabwe right now cannot take advantage of those many opportunities because all their savings were wiped out by the hyperinflation. Let's deal with the problem. The elephant in the room is the case, the double case of rigged elections and bad governance. Let's deal with it. And not try to bury our heads in the sand and pretend that we can somehow be a prosperous nation regardless of the gross mismanagement, the rampant corruption of the regime, particularly after 44 years of seeing this happen. It really is disappointing. Now some people try to preach the same story and yet refuse to see the reality. The reality is there. The people in Zimbabwe are not lazy. The people in Zimbabwe are not, it's not that they're happy to be poor. They are not. They would like to live a decent life too. But just that the system is overwhelming. National economies cannot, the individual cannot prosper in a country where the governance is hopelessly oppressive and wasteful. That we have seen again and again these last 44 years. Just deal with it. Let's stop pretending that we don't see it, that it is not happening. It is happening. The resources are being creamed off by the few ruling elite and wasted on things that are not helping the country. That has nothing to do with the country's long-term interests. That is what has brought down Zimbabwe to its knees. This criminal waste of resources by the ruling elite, whom we cannot remove from office because they rig elections. Just deal with the problem of rigged elections. Let's have a competent government that is accountable to the people. I'm surprised that our activist here she doesn't seem to even realize that Zimbabwe has got an illegitimate government right now. Does she know that Zanu PF rigged the elections last year? And it is not only me who is saying Zanu PF rigged the elections. SADC said so. The AU said the same thing. We have an illegitimate regime right now, confirming our position as a nation ruled by a pariah state. And if you seriously expect a pariah state, you can still have a pariah state and still have economic prosperity. You live in a totally different world. This is cloud cuckoo land. And after 44 years, it is a pity that some people will still want to pretend that Zimbabwe is cloud cuckoo land. It is not. The reality in Zimbabwe says we are living in a pariah state, and as long as the country remains a pariah state, the hope of any meaningful economic recovery are slim. And as for economic prosperity, you can forget it. Well, you go to Zimbabwe, or if you're in Zimbabwe, go ahead and seize those many plethora of opportunities. Yes, a few have become rich, but in Zimbabwe, if you are filthy rich, it's either you must be an incredible, a genius, or we are incredibly corrupt. It's either one or the two. And why should one be a genius? Not all of us are geniuses. Some of us are average people. And as an average person, you will never succeed in Zimbabwe. That is the fact. You'll have to have political connections to succeed. And how many of those people have those political connections? Let's deal with a problem, for Pete's sake. And the problem has been staring us in the face. We have a regime that is corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical. And it has remained in power these last 44 years for no other reason other than that they rig elections. If people were given their right to a meaningful vote, Zanu PF would have been removed from office a long time ago. The opposition should have implemented the reforms, and that would have removed Zanu PF from office by now. They did not. They wasted even the golden opportunity during the GNU. Let's deal with a problem. Hiding our heads in the sand is not going to solve this problem. After 44 years of rigged elections and bad governance, let's deal with the elephant in the room, for Pete's sake.